General David Fraser, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
This is your book, Operation Medusa, the operation that saved, the furious battle that saved Afghanistan from the Taliban. There have been a couple of other books on Operation Medusa. Why did you want to write one?
Well, I've always wanted to write a book on Medusa, but I needed time and space to sort of move away from the emotional aspects and kind of get some reflection on it. And I also needed the right conditions. And it all came together with my co-author, Brian Hennington, and a great publisher called Penguin Random House, and also the ability to get, most importantly, all the other voices of the men and women who are part of this operation: David Richards, Ben Frakley, Mike Gauthier, because this is their story too. And what this book actually does, it puts into context a lot of the literature that's already out there and answers two questions: what actually happened and why things happened.
All right, what actually happened then?
Well, first of all, I mean, there's no operation in the world, as good as we are as planners. Every operation is ugly in its execution, and this one is probably one of the ugliest things I've ever seen in execution. But it really demonstrates, opens up a window on complexity and the geopolitics around NATO and what was going on at the time. National caveats were a big consideration for us about what nations would or would not do. It takes nothing away from what the men and women on the ground did, which is absolutely heroic. A lot of sacrifice and commitment on their part. But what we talk about is relationships. We talk about politics. We talk about our relationship with Afghans.
Now, General Fraser, as a military man who spent 31 years in the Canadian Forces, you rose from lieutenant to major general. It's a long, long trajectory.
It only feels like a blink of an eye, and it was done. I was blessed that, I was able to command on operations at every one of my rank levels, and that actually helped prepare me. I came out of the United States working with Northern Command. That gave me the relationships with Americans that I needed to work with, 10th Mountain Division in Operation Enduring Freedom and understand how the Americans do things, including understanding of dealing with thugs like the Taliban and the narco trade, some of the skill sets we needed that we built into our organization in Afghanistan.
Now, I imagine you've been asked several times, why were we in Afghanistan? But as, again, a military commander, is yours more the case of ours is not to question why, ours is but to do or die kind of thing?
I think, politicians make the decisions about going over, but once you're there, the soldiers are the ones that if they really believe in what they're doing, they put their hearts and mind into it. And there wasn't a soldier, sailor, airman, airwoman who over there that I met who didn't believe in what we were doing, which was providing hope and opportunity to people who don't have it, and providing people the things that you and I take for granted, and that was building a nation. And this is what Canadians have always done throughout our history, and we were just doing that at the same time fighting an insurgency, which was trying to destroy everything we were building.
Now, General Hillier, CDS Hillier, had once had a very forceful statement say, in reaction to, Canada has a peacekeeper. We're peacekeepers. What do you think about that name that has been labeled to the Canadian Forces?
Well, that label actually is the perception that the Americans and many other people had of us when we went into Afghanistan. When you look at it, it actually had some substance because we hadn't been in combat since Korea or World War II, and so the memory of what Canada did in combat it was pretty long, and not many people other than reading books. So a lot of people had some questions about whether or not we were going to be any good in combat. Well, the 1st Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, the 1st Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, and all the Canadians who were there dispelled all of that. So what the Americans saw was after our first few engagements, they came back and went, okay, you guys have done really well. What does Ottawa think about this? Because you took casualties. And went, well, they're upset because you took casualties, but there's no change in our commitment. And I want to mention that it's in the book. Prime Minister Harper came over and visited us, and most leaders came over for a couple hours. He came for 3 days and 2 nights. And to the Americans and to the international coalition, that was just a phenomenal message that Canada was thoroughly committed to this whole government approach. The Prime Minister wanted to come over, talk to the men and women on the ground, and I have it filtered what we were doing on the ground and did it make sense so he could go back and sort of talk to his parliamentarians. So this was a big lead nation aspect for us, but the other thing too is we actually solidified our role in the international community with the efforts of our men and women.
Canada's forces have trained for decades for a conventional type war, both when they're training in Canada and for those many decades we were in Europe. The idea was if push came to shove, we would be facing an organized military from the Soviet forces, for example. What kind of preparation, you say in the book, we weren't really prepared for, at first anyway, for the situation in Afghanistan. What was that like?
Well, we went over to build a nation and fight a counterinsurgency, and there's certain tactics, techniques, and procedures to do that. And we were the best trained of any formation to go overseas. We were the best equipped of any formation to go overseas. And, I never felt unsupported. I always felt fully committed and supported with my nation. But when we got faced with the largest battle that NATO's ever fought, the largest battle that Canada's ever fought in living memory, which was 500 Taliban, their top 10 commanders from 5 provinces, including Pakistan, having to do an assault river crossing into a prepared defensive position on Panj Way, nobody in any country ever anticipated we'd have to fight a conventional battle a la the Cold War that we were faced with. But that being said, we were up to the task. We were able to adjust, based on some of the worst days in our lives, which was on the 3rd of September when Charles Company lost 4 soldiers. On the 4th, they lost another soldier and 32 wounded with the friendly fire. But we adjusted. We took care of our men and women. We jigged the plan, and we came out the other side, having moved the process along, and our mission was not to lose.
What about the political situation, decision, I should say, to say, Canada doesn't need tanks anymore, and you're over there, and you're finding out that the 25 millimeter cannon on your labs is sort of like pea shooters against a wall kind of thing?
It's a great question because, mud is as strong as concrete. It's counterintuitive, but it is. And we were using the 25 millimeter chain gun, not good enough. We were using bombs from planes, causing too much damage. And all I needed to do was take care of the 3 bastards inside the house. So I needed precision, and precision only came from a tank. And also, a tank also has a psychological impact. When you come to a knife fight, bring a gun. When you come to a gunfight, bring a tank. It scares the crap out of someone because you got to win 15-0, not 3-2, 15-0. So I wrote back to General Hillier and I said, I need tanks because it's going to minimize collateral damage. It gives me more precision. It gives me the psychological effect. And my staff said, we're getting rid of the tanks. And I said, they're not gone yet. And, God bless, Ottawa and everyone else, because within a month, we had tanks.
But we did have shortages of certain types of equipment. And in the book, you mentioned that the Americans came through time and again with personnel and equipment.
Okay, and and they did. And so Canada hasn't done this type of operation in tens, if not 30, 40 years. And so when we got onto the ground, this was a degree of intensity which we haven't experienced in living memory. And so a lot of the equipment that we were acquiring at the time, so we acquired radios, we acquired the 777 howitzer, and we acquired a whole bunch of. We didn't have it right away because it takes time when you buy something to get it in theater. And the Americans, God bless them, in their due diligence and whatnot, they said, well, what do you need right now? How much have you got? And they made sure we had the resources we needed immediately once we hit the ground, that we could go out there and completely deliver the effects that we're looking for. And then as our equipment came in, we just kind of gave them back their stuff. But it was just everyone worked together. And we did the same thing for the British. We did the same thing for the Dutch. Everybody was working together to help out the other person.
Well, in the book, you mentioned it also, a little bit of a conflict, I guess you'd call it that, about the various NATO forces, some of whom were perhaps less committed. And of course, you have this NATO organization. You're the commander of this organization with several countries, and they all have sort of different ROEs, rules of engagement. That must have caused a little bit of friction.
That was perhaps the biggest surprise about NATO, because the NATO is attack on one, is an attack on all. Everyone's supposed to come to the show and support each other. The reality is not so much. And that's got nothing to do with the men and women on the ground, because, I had people from certain countries that were crying in front of me because their nations had said they're not going to come and participate. Nations played the red card, who's saying we can't participate, the risk is too high. Other nations, I call them pink cards, where in fact today I can do ABC, tomorrow I'll do AB. It was frustrating. It was complicated, and it really constrained what we were able to do.
Now, when you talk about this fight, there was a story written by Adam Day. Perhaps you could just read the paragraph here, what Adam Day wrote about the Canadians in battle.
They've been to a place beyond the normal world. They've seen their friends lying wounded on the ground, seen them die, and they've seen their own death. It was right there in the rockets flying by and the end of everything. It's a place without illusion, a place where fear and courage are the same thing, live or die. You do your own duty or you don't. It's a place from which any return is difficult. Don't feel sorry for them. They don't want that. They are professional warriors, and the first thing the men of Charles' company want you to know about the Battle of Objective Rugby is that they didn't lose. Not on that day, not on the mission. The attack failed, and it was a bloody chaos. Yes, but the task force kicked a mighty amount of Taliban ass that day. The enemy were lined up, hidden, hundreds of them firing from three sides, and the Canadians went forward despite it all. They faced up, and went into the guns, into the rockets, they attacked.
What does that do for you reading that?
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, Charles' company went in that on the 3rd of September, into a prepared defensive position, which we knew. We had been shelling them. Our artillery preparations, much like history has shown us, has limited effects, and it really comes down to the fighting spirit of the men and women who are doing the attack. They got beaten the first day. The second day, they took tremendous casualties from friendly fire. But on the day that we took Objective Rugby, Charles' company, what was left of them, were there. They stepped onto that objective, and they showed the Taliban, they showed everybody, including themselves, they were not defeated, but they defeated the Taliban.
You've also said that we weren't in Afghanistan to win. We were just there not to lose, kind of thing. What do you mean by that?
The idea of a military success, a military victory, is something that is perhaps, its day has gone by. The last time we did that, World War II, you might say, if you think about Wellington and Napoleon, but today, militaries just actually buy time. Buy time so that a peace settlement can happen. And so what Operation Medusa was, it was not to lose, was just to push the yardsticks down. And what we did was the Taliban changed their behavior. They changed it again after Medusa. They've never fought like that before, since then. And what we have done is contributed to the fact that in 2018, the Afghans are now talking about a peace process that's inclusive of the Taliban. That was our job, was to get us to that point where we could find a political solution.
What's it like for you as a commander, though, after? I mean, this is now, we're 10 years, 12 years past the battle. What's it like for you as a commander? A lot of soldiers have come back with PTSD. You've seen those same things. You've seen the bodies. You've seen the killings. What's it like for you?
It's hard to see the men and women who went over there, because when every one of us came back changed. Mm-hmm. You don't go over there, and a lot of us came back broken. And to see those men and women who are broken, we need to help them. And in part, writing this book, we wanted to tell their story. We wanted to explain them and give them more reasons why things happen, what things happen there, to help them with their struggle that they have every day, because this is a great story of perseverance, of heroism, of sacrifice, and they need to hear what happened above them. And what I've seen within my own team, the posse who are in this book, is that we shared a lot of tears as we wrote this book and whatnot, but we also found a lot of salvation in the sense that we got questions answered that had been lingering out there. And this is a great Canadian story, and I think Canadians have always supported their men and women, and I think this story is going to be helpful in providing them even more reasons to support their men and women.
Is it important for Canadians to understand the military and be proud of what you've done?
personally, having been in the mill, I think it's hugely important that Canadians understand what their military does, because most of the time it happens out of sight, out of mind.
And you're peacekeepers, after all, right?
We're peacekeepers, we're war fighters, we are whatever our nation needs to protect and defend the democracy and their way of life that we have here, and as Canadians, to provide hope and opportunity for people around the world. This is what Canadians have always done, and we do a great job. And the lessons learned out of Medusa, 12 years ago, are still as germane today. When I look at what Canada is going to be doing in Mali for another UN peacekeeping mission.
In an extremely dangerous situation.
The situation on the ground looks very, very similar to something that we did 12 years ago. And, those lessons learned about what a whole of government approach, what the men and women have done in a comprehensive, focused approach, those lessons are still applicable today. And I think if, we apply some of those lessons today, we'll be doing less learning of old situations, and we can spend our time learning about new ways of providing hope and opportunity.
Is it perhaps also a lesson for the government to give more to the military, get them more equipment, better equipment, modern equipment kind of thing? Be prepared?
Being prepared is always critical. This government has come out with a new, defense policy, which makes a lot of promises, and part of those promises and those commitments are including capital. Capital procurement is, things like tanks, planes, and ships that our men and women will use. But the second order effect of that capital is it supports Canadian industry. And Canadian industry is jobs back home, it's IP, and these are things that can actually strengthen our economy and provide, the well-being and creating wealth in this country. And that's something that we should all kind of look at, how do we help everybody in this rubric called defense and security.
General Fraser, in a couple of sentences, how would you sum up the experience in Afghanistan and Op Medusa?
Well, Operation Medusa was a turning point in the Taliban behavior, and they've never gone back to having, fighting in such a way like this. Operation Medusa also provided time that the peace process could go on, but it illustrates the one thing that people want to remember about this book. It's about relationships. It's about people. And the relationships we build amongst our own team and amongst our international allies, when the chips are down, you fall back onto those relationships. And the relationships we built with a country called Afghanistan, and they will ever be beholding to what Canadians sacrificed to provide hope and opportunity for their people.
Major General David Fraser, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.